What happened to me after I finished my master's, I thought I was a hotshot. I'd gone to a good university. I had got a really good result. I then wanted to work in the UK, and I assumed that that would be the easiest thing in the world. And I was then unemployed for about 6 months. And I applied for somewhere between 30 and 50 jobs and got rejected from almost all of them. Got to the point where I just wanted to do any work, I wanted to do any job.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ways to Wealth podcast. Today I am joined by Will. Will, why don't you give us the too long didn't read about where you're at and how you got to where you kind of got to?
Thanks very much for having me. So I am a lawyer. I work at Meredith Connell, and I specialise in fraud and civil recovery and white collar issues. And I'm not sure if that is where I thought I would be 10 years ago, but we can explore that.
Yeah.
But it, at the very least, has led me to your podcast, so that must be a win.
Yes. Well, when we met before, it was quite an interesting conversation because you were talking about how when you're kind of getting called into the work that you do, and interestingly, we had someone that was doing insolvency accounting, and that was their specialty, and we had them on the podcast recently. The scenario in which you end up getting involved is not the happiest state and not the best state. So something like you said, and when we met, is like, oh, something's probably gone wrong, which has led me to getting involved. When you joined Meredith Connell, was that did you start in that area or was it like a different part of the practice? Yeah, so I started at Meredith Connell in 2010. Yeah. Wow. And I moved from another large law firm, and I started out doing regulatory stuff. So, for example, I did a lot of work for the Department of Corrections. I'd go into prisons and usually say that the people in there should stay there, or the people who've been let out should be brought back in. Right. And various other sort of regulatory clients like the Department of Conservation, who always had interesting files, and also did my fair share of criminal prosecution work. And I am a big believer in the fact that gives you a great grounding because it teaches you how to deal with unpredictability in court and in life, and makes you realize that you have to have systems to deal with things that are unexpected and quite serious at an early age. And I think it also allows you to see everything that's going on in your city and things that you might not otherwise see, and you get to understand the explanations for the decisions that people make. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for that experience. I do remember thinking at the very beginning, having come from a very nice corporate law firm, to the next day being told, okay, you have to go down to the district court and there's this sex offender who's done these things and we need to make sure that they are kept in this place. I remember thinking, what the hell have I done? This is completely different to what I'm used to, but I'm very grateful for the experience, and I would credit that experience for allowing me to sit here and talk about white-collar crime. Yeah, that's intense. How do you switch it off at night, or do you not? Yeah, well, I think definitely that criminal work, which I do less of, I'd say, does have a mental cost. And actually at Meredith Connell, for those people who are doing criminal work day in, day out, we take that very seriously. There is a whole program around it. But I do think, particularly for lawyers and, especially for criminal prosecutors, making sure your mental health is fit is very, very important, and coming up with strategies that work for you is very important. So I'm a big fan of the Happiness Pod with Dr. Laurie Santos, which has a number of very good coping mechanisms. Cool. It goes into the ways that you can actually make yourself happy in ways that seem counterintuitive. Yeah. So I'd highly recommend that. The other very good piece of advice I got given by someone who I can't recall is, if you're ever at work and you're feeling majorly stressed, go to the bathroom, run the hot water tap, and just wash your hands in the warm water.
Yeah,
it is a very, very calming and relaxing experience, and does allow you just to take stock of things that are going on. And I use that pretty regularly.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I often do the washing up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll listen to a podcast.
Yeah, totally. While listening to a podcast, but just because like a lot of people, especially that are not in, I would say maybe the entrepreneurial space or that kind of space, kind of are like, oh well, if you're stressed, you should just turn off and just go do something else. Whereas I think for a lot of people, I guess that are inclined to go on the journey, perhaps you're more of an active you're active. Even resting is probably some sort of activity that you choose to do, and oftentimes you'd rather just be in it, actually just taking a few steps forward, because if you can just make progress every day, even if it's a little bit of progress, that kind of is like the washing in your hands. And it's the same with the washing up. I'm stressed right now. There's obviously tons of stuff that's out of my control going on in my business from time to time. I can make sure the kitchen's clean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's worse for you as an entrepreneur, because I like to say it's important for lawyers to be able to switch off and just remember that your business is to take other people's problems and try and fix them and let them live in your brain for as long as possible. But you have your own problems. And you need to keep part of your brain to deal with those problems. So I do really try to remind myself of that. I've got plenty of my own problems that need fixing. And there are some times that I can just devote to that rather than client work. But I suppose when it's like your personal assets and personal wealth on the line, then it's more important.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because it's hard to disconnect. Yeah, like I often think of, good lawyers are like uncles. They get to put the problem back at night in a way, but they get to be there and active and present when they're there. But they are still being able to go and live their own problems, which is still serious in their world. That's what they need to do. Yeah, especially when you're an entrepreneur and, you've got arguably the majority of your wealth tied up in an asset that is, for all intents and purposes, extremely speculative. Like a lot of, we're getting a lot of interest now from for Acuity, and that's great. That's been years of hard work, and it's now starting to kind of pay off and be like, kind of, you're feeling it, and we're getting great reviews, and people are saying nice things about us. That's great, and people are saying, "Oh, I love Acuity," and that, and it's like, well, nothing's changed, but we're now through an accelerator. We're going through an accelerator, and that's happened to have helped us with that for you. But our business hasn't changed. It's just that we have stayed alive long enough to start to get the recognition. And yeah, like as an entrepreneur, you're putting everything that you've got in an illiquid, speculative asset that, when the fundamentals are probably the same day to day, one day you could feel or be valued at one price, and then the next day it could be very different. And I think that's something you just end up coming to terms with in a way.
And also, I presume, like the most well-known instances of being an entrepreneur are the $1 billion successes. And there's a narrative that, you have these geniuses who, with relatively little effort, turned their idea into $2 billion companies. But it does seem like the reality is, no, it's a product of tons and tons of hard work and time.
And tons of time.
And time, which people can't, and just huge amounts of stress.
And massive amounts of stress. But you got to find methods to kind of deal with that and cope with it. And like you say, I think what the media doesn't do a good job of when they talk about big successes is they don't properly, describe the time. It's the time that often gets missed in these articles. Like my friend recently sold 60% of his business of one of his startups. He's had a few other exits as well. Very successful guy. Wasn't picked up in the New Zealand media, even though it was $150, I think, $1 million US valuation with zero money raised. And they sold 60%. Didn't get picked up by a single New Zealand media. Got picked up by the New York Times, though, which is surprising. That surprised me that happened, because it's like literally their office on High Street, and like they are running the biggest social media site for movies.
Oh wow, that's quite cool.
And they're doing, I think last time I checked, they're doing 50 million sessions a month on the web. So they're doing more on mobile too.
Yeah.
But it was 12 years. It was 12 years and a large amount of money invested over that 12 years.
And presumably a lot of failures along the way. So I do think the failures of entrepreneurship as a path to success need to be
it's like Slack.
piloted.
Slack, they were building a game. They actually were a game company to begin with, and then somehow you get to Slack, which then I think sold to Microsoft in the end. But yeah, completely different. And there's tons of examples of that. You could even say.
Nvidia's another obvious.
Gaming, and very obscure in the early days, and a long journey. That journey is probably 40 years almost. Like they went public in the 2000s, so they would have been going for a good probably 10 years before that. So 30 year journey or so.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll be prepared for, especially, maybe it's about getting the expectations right, because I guess it depends on what industry you're in, what problem you're solving, and how hairy is it, right? Yeah. Like trying to go and do this versus my prior startup is like a completely different game, because the last one wasn't regulated. It was gaming. No one was thinking about what they were doing in a profound way, whereas when you're trying to reinvent or just take a new approach or a more novel approach to financial services, it's just naturally a longer cycle.
Yeah.
It's cool to get used to it. And I think what's interesting with your line of work is that it's very deep, as in like you're doing a lot of deep work. And that must be extremely stimulating. Do you have a preference towards the deep work versus the court action?
Yeah. So I think, regardless of your job, there's the stuff that you do which is interesting.
Yeah.
And there's the stuff that you do to allow you to do the interesting stuff. Yeah. And if you can show me a job where you just get to do the interesting stuff and it's amazingly well paid and relatively low risk, then let me know what it is. I'll sign up for it. But the reality is there's always going to be that mix, and the way that you conceptualize it in your own mind is quite important. And there are certainly parts of my job that I tell myself, I'm doing this because it allows me to do the things I really am interested in, and the most stimulating things, and things that might get a bit more publicity. So I think I very much enjoy the court work. I like the idea of being presented with a problem, and then sometimes at the beginning it looks hopeless,
right?
And then you do some research, and I get to do less of that these days because I have smart juniors to do it. But you do some research and you think about different arguments, and some seem okay, some seem obviously bad. But you come up with what you think is a workable argument. And one of the things I like most is those conversations between me and the other lawyers I work with, particularly like junior lawyers. Yeah. And you have like arguments amongst yourself, like this is a good idea or no, it's not. And it's better to have those arguments internally rather than with the judge.
Totally.
And you work out what the best answer is. And then you use your powers of persuasion and written advocacy to construct those arguments and put them into written submissions and sort of try and marshal the evidence so it's as favourable to you as possible. And then you present them to a court and you try to persuade a court that your solution to the problem is correct. And if you do well, then you'll get a nice formal decision, which is a matter of public record that says, yes,
You won.
You won, or your approach is right. And then sometimes you get a judgment saying no.
And do you get so it's like a MMA record where it's like yes, no, and indecision, or?
Look, I think I would be lying to say that lawyers don't keep track of their win-loss record, but there are other cases which I have done, like particularly on the Crown side, which I feel I've done really good work, but I've lost.
Yeah.
But sometimes the argument needs to be put for the judge to find against you. And
it's like with the information you had.
Yeah, exactly. You might have got close.
comfortable.
Yeah, you might have got close. Or sometimes you do need to present the other side of the argument, and it might be unpopular, but it needs to be presented so that the court can make the right decision. Because if it's just getting presented one side, then it's going to make bad decisions. So, yes, I think all lawyers keep track of their win-loss rate, but that's not everything. I think we're a public service, and we do form a very important part of how the community is regulated and run, and the way that we present our arguments are a part of that.
Totally. There's a great book that I think all lawyers should get onto, I've now decided in this moment, which is Thinking in Bets by Andy Duke.
No, never.
It's about disassociating outcomes from decisions.
Process, all right, yeah.
And progress. Yeah. So, that, to me kind of speaks to, well, you probably had incomplete information to a certain degree, because it's in the past, whatever you're dealing with is in the past. And to a certain degree, it's hard to really get a full, clear picture. I mean, obviously there are going to be some circumstances and scenarios where you get a really great picture, but there's always going to be something probably missing or slightly warped, and you can do great work, like you said, and not get the outcome you desired, and that's part of the process.
So I think there's a common saying that law would be very easy if it wasn't for the clients. And so often you do turn up with a case, and it will depend on how particular witnesses perform in the court itself, which you generally have some idea about, but you very rarely know exactly how a particular witness will come off on a particular day and what a judge will make of that evidence. And so much of it is like situational, like what was the evidence given before, what was the arguments before, was the judge in a good or bad mood because of something you did or didn't do, or the other side did or didn't do. And I fully believe that our judiciary in New Zealand is world class and could be put up against any other judiciary anywhere around the world. I think they do amazing work, but it is a human system, and it never fails to surprise me how two people can look at exactly the same thing and draw completely opposite conclusions. And in a human system where that's sort of prevailing, it is almost impossible to tell what the result will be with 100% certainty when you walk into the courtroom. It's only at the end that you can tell that. Yeah.
Why do you think so many world-class investors started in law?
Well, that's an interesting question. I do think like what you get taught at law school is a methodology more than anything. Like most of the substance you get taught is pretty useless because like at a basic level of principle, it's fine, but you have no idea what cases you'll be doing when you're in practice. And often it's like this very, very tiny area of law that no one's really thought of before. So substance is not particularly helpful, but the process is really helpful. And it's about, sort of as you said before, like analysing facts and working out what the consequences of those facts are. And the process that law school teaches you is it teaches you to sort of distill the facts and then work out what the precedents are and what the law is. And then, most importantly, sort of apply questions of who has the burden of proof And what is the standard of that proof? So there are a couple of different standards. One that you are most familiar with from the criminal law is beyond a reasonable doubt. The Crown has to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt, and that is a pretty high standard. Usually the direction is you have to be sure, and that's appropriate because it is about people's liberty, and we should be sure that something happened before we interfere with a person's liberty.
Yeah.
If it's just a commercial dispute, if I want to sue you because I say I lent you money, you didn't pay it back, then that standard is the balance of probability, so just more likely than not. Right. And that reflects the fact that you need to find a way to resolve a dispute, and it has to be resolved one way or another, and we just look at generally probabilities. So coming back to your question, I think that methodology is pretty useful for making decisions, and certainly when you become used to it, you find yourself applying it in many different situations. And it's about working out what the facts are, and then working out what the precedent for the thing you would like to do is, and how helpful are those precedents, and then asking yourself, well, what do I need to know, and how sure do I have to be of it? And I can see pretty easily how you might be able to apply some of that to investing, or at least that would be one way of going about it. Yeah. So it does not surprise me to hear that a lot of very, very good investors have started in law. Yeah,
it does make sense. And I think, and then obviously forensic accounting as well. You see a lot of guys go from there, especially the guys I'm interested in that like to do like a lot of digging and
exactly,
which is quite interesting. It's a shame that the kind of environment we're in right now. Well, is it a shame? I think it is kind of a shame. Is that you pretty much over the last year you've seen some of the largest kind of investigatory short sellers and research firms basically closed. Even though the stats on its Hindenburg are the biggest one.
They closed recently.
And they closed recently, and obviously their work has produced many prosecutions and done much to help create a balanced market. And you need that view, and I think that what we're in, the environment we're in at the moment, is a lot of indiscriminate buying, which is difficult, because if I basically am conceding the fact that the price doesn't matter, then I'm naturally going to create perhaps some market dynamics that are not ideal. Ultimately, you're going to get, if you're saying that, hey, it doesn't matter, then you're saying, that's just opening the door to basically kind of probably misaligned expectations and unrealistic expectations. And in that kind of environment, firms like Hindenburg just probably get a whole lot of, I think it was actually to do with, I think they got sued. And I think a part of them getting sued on something meant that they had to close down, or that was probably a settlement that happened. My suspicion is that they got sued, and they obviously were losing, or something was going wrong there, and they had to probably just close the practice based on that. And I get both sides, because some others are like, well, they're manipulating the price because they've already got a short position probably, and then they're releasing this research, and because they're well known, they have an impact on the market, which is fair and true.
But didn't mean what they were saying wasn't true.
Didn't mean that their research didn't have merit.
And I think most people, most sophisticated people, would know that they are not just in the public service game. They are using it to try and make money. So I don't know where I come out on that. I do think, like, in a world where there is less money for investigative journalism, and there is sort of increasing pressure on people like auditors who might otherwise find financial wrongdoing. There are various ways that wrongdoing, particularly financial wrongdoing, might be uncovered, and that might be through investigative journalism, it might be through whistleblowing, it might be through auditing. And, the reports of short sellers is a genuine way, and there has been, some success in identifying genuine instances of fraud. So
Totally.
I think I'm probably willing to buy into the idea that as long as they are upfront about what they're doing, and they're saying, look, this is true, but we're in it to make money, then they may well still be a force for public good. But I probably wouldn't be a short seller myself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can do that investigation both sides, because the market can have a very negative view about something, some specific thing, and then you do the work and you find, oh, well, actually the perception is potentially overdone. I definitely agree with that side, because I think it's choosing to, it's like being in your line of work. It's kind of choosing the part of investing which is a bit more negative and I think some really good value investors that I think have really good stoic minds just say it's kind of not great karmically to have to do that, because you're constantly thinking about, well, what is the worst thing, but I think it does, like you say, it plays a role. And it actually plays almost a more important role today, because with there being more indexing and more indiscriminate buying, you probably need that more in the market because there are less active investors selling.
Yeah, I think you've made quite a good point there, and it does come back to something I said earlier about the importance of putting the opposite view to make a good decision.
Totally.
And that is basically what you just described. You can have that sort of naysaying, and people can then hopefully make up their own mind based on that enterprise's reputation and what they think their motivations are, as to whether that is good information or not.
And I think it's like being a car, someone that does parking tickets. The short sellers are not liked, right? And I think it's like doing parking tickets. It's not liked either. It's not the nicest, because people see it as being a negative. But yeah, like you say, these parking, giving out parking fines, and I've got plenty in my time. It is a necessary thing. And
as a lawyer, I have some sympathy to that view as well.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk a bit about the path to partner, and how a young, ambitious person can put themselves in a good footing for it without it. Because I think there's two sides of the story, right? There's becoming a partner, and partners are like, hey, this is how I did it. And then there's the other side, which is the more pessimistic side, which is basically where people take the view that kind of grinding to become a partner is not in your best interest, it's in the interest of, the people that want you to try and become a partner. And I think that's a relatively pessimistic view. Because people are becoming new partners all the time, and it's possible. And if you believe that you can do it and you can do the right work, then you'll get there eventually. But I think there's probably many nuances involved in that path. And I guess maybe start with did you know immediately you were like, okay, I'm looking to go, when you joined MC, were you actually like, right, I'm going to get to partner here, I've got a vision for that and I'm going to go out and execute that? Or
no, not at all. No, and I think one of the things about probably a number of professional sort of services routes is that you can go through university and into your first job basically as a path of least resistance, because what happens is you go through university and your penultimate or final year, you might get offered work experience, clerkship with a large firm, and then they show you a very good time. It's obviously enjoyable, and then they offer you a job after that, and it's very easy to accept that because that gives you the security. I'm very grateful I did that, because I accepted my job offer in March of 2008.
Nice.
It was a good time to lock in employment. But it does mean that you can find yourself in employment doing your job without making too many hard decisions about how you got there and what you want to do. And I actually found it very difficult to leave my first job and go to Meredith Connell because I hadn't had to make a decision about my career path. And it was very difficult to tell my boss and go through that sort of thing. So I do think those moments where you have to think, what do I want out of this? What am I thinking about my future career are important, and I would identify that as one of them. And I also think I made a decision to go from a better paying job to a worse paying job, not by much, but it was still significant at the time because I wanted to do more court work and do a wider range of law, and identified that as something that would be better for me in terms of progression, and I just enjoy it more. And I think I did identify that as something that would, overall pay off if it didn't do that in the short term. And then what I would sort of credit in sort of those next 3 or 4 years when you're a junior at one of these law firms is just working very hard, sort of working out what the technical skills are that make you very valuable as a junior, and I identified that as research and drafting and attention to detail, and being very easy to work with. And I think it's a very important time in your career because you're pretty young. You have the benefit of having a lot of time to throw at problems, which I don't now have because I have children and other responsibilities. But you're sort of a little bit indestructible. You can work late nights and come back the next day. You're confident. You don't
have the scars.
Exactly. So you can just rock up in court and say, I can do these sorts of things. So I think that's a really important time in your professional life, and you're starting to work with people who you might work with for the rest of your career and building your reputation. So I definitely think having that period where you're very much about, I'm going to get good at the sometimes quite boring but technical side of my job, that is something I definitely attribute to where I am now. After 4 years I went off and did a master's, which was fun. I really think for people who are interested in doing further study that it is a good option, mainly because you get to meet people from all around the world.
It's the network.
Yeah, the network, and these are people that you will get to stay in touch with for the rest of your life, and the people who sort of think like you and have the same experiences, but they're just from different countries, you'll never get on very well with them. And in terms of future network, that's helpful, but it's just a fun experience.
Totally.
What happened to me after I finished my my master's, I thought I was a hot shot. I'd gone to a good university. I had got a really good result. I then wanted to work in the UK, and I assumed that would be the easiest thing in the world. And I was then unemployed for about 6 months.
Right.
And I applied for somewhere between 30 and 50 jobs, and got rejected from almost all of them.
Yeah.
It got to the point where I just wanted to do any work, I wanted to do any job. And I investigated being somebody who held a stop-go sign. I'd be very happy to do that because I just needed the money. And you needed a special type of shoes or something. I couldn't justify the investment in the shoes to actually take up the job.
Right.
So it was not particularly fun at the time. I think it just strips away all that confidence that I described before.
Right.
Because you just realize how much your job, like that conception of yourself as someone who is like successful and employable and good at your job, you get turned down over and over again by the awful recruiters in the UK you might be familiar with. That is a pretty humbling experience.
Yeah.
But I look back on it now very fondly. Well, not fondly. I'm, again, very grateful for that experience.
Grateful for the growth that you basically had to go through while dealing with that.
Yeah. And I certainly wasn't full of confidence by the end of it. It made me appreciate the contribution my wife made, because obviously at the time she was working. She was funding us. I was not. She was supporting me, and she was doing a wonderful job. It's just a nice reminder when you finally get a job that it's actually an awful process a lot of the time to get there, and it's sort of deliberately that way. Like it's set up to weed out people who don't really want to do it. So I would not necessarily recommend to people that they be unemployed for a long time, but it's just good to remember that there's that process. Yeah. And again, I'm very grateful for that process. Finally did get a job, worked for a while in London doing the same sort of thing that I do now, white collar crime. But I do think that period of unemployment did make me realise, like, there's no one really coming to your rescue. Like, you have to go off and you have to turn off that part of your brain that is embarrassed to ask people for help, or to, again, send out your CV and talk yourself up. And there just are times in your life where you have to do that. And again, not saying I recommend going through too often, but it's an important experience. The next thing I'd say is I actually got to the point where I had, finally I had two offers, and there was one which paid very, very well, and there was one that paid slightly less well, but still very well. And I took the one which paid slightly less well again, and again I found that what I was giving up in terms of money, I was getting back in terms of opportunities and like time to do other stuff and general enjoyment. So I am very much sold on the idea that always sort of interrogate that second best financial offer very closely, because you're usually getting something quite good for not being paid top dollar. And then I had a quite enjoyable time working in London, seeing how that world operated.
A little bit more scale, maybe.
Scale, yep, exactly. London has sort of set itself up as a legal hub. So you just saw disputes from all around the world being brought there, and the type of work I did expose me to a whole lot of very interesting things that you might not see here. And I think that was a time, it was only when I left to go overseas and do my master's that I really twigged that you have to find a way to keep track of all the people that you work with along the way, and have ways to contact them in future if you need them. So that's when I set up a LinkedIn account and started to use it in a relatively sustained way, because I think I identified that, like, ideally, I prefer just to be like sitting at my desk and doing the legal stuff and like researching really interesting points of law and arguing cases. But unfortunately, in any business, you can't just do the technical stuff. You have to go through the slightly less fun, more grubby.
Slight software engineers love programming, but they don't love managing. Yeah,
exactly. And we'll get to that in due course. But yeah, there are all these other things that come with being a lawyer, which are not the things you signed up to do when you went to law school, and not things you enjoy. But for so many people, if you want to continue in the industry, you have to learn how to do them. One is, if not networking, then just keeping in touch with people.
Totally.
And the other one, as you say, is management, because skipping ahead a little bit, in professional services, like you get up to partner level, and you get there by being a very good lawyer.
Right.
And then they say, great, well
Stop
done.
doing that.
Stop doing that. Here is this completely different job. And actually, those skills that made you a good lawyer are probably going to make you terrible at this new job, but away you go. Here are the 12 people in your team to manage. Here are your budgets. Here are your business development goals.
Right.
And we can have a discussion about whether that is the best way to run a business, but that's just the way it is. And you do have to remind yourself that this is part of it. Like, as a lawyer, there's not much difference between the way you have to sell your services to someone who sells like mattresses or a real estate agent. Like, unfortunately, you need to find people with legal problems, and you need to marry them up with the people who have the brains to fix the legal problems.
Yeah.
And the only way you can do that is if people know who you are and what you do. And again, like, if in the perfect world, I wouldn't have to spend as much time doing that, although parts of it I enjoy. But that is what running your own business is like. So you have to get comfortable doing that, even if I wouldn't say I'm naturally comfortable with it. I've learned to be comfortable. So, coming back to your original question, like, how do you get to where you are? I think it's about establishing those good technical skills. You can't get
there without that.
Exactly, because people know the guys and girls who just talk a good game and don't have the substance behind them, and they get found out eventually. So you have to have the skills, and then you have to have the relationships and the respect, and particularly people that you can turn to when things go wrong, and you can just say, "Oh, I've got this problem. What do you think about it?" And being able to call in a few favours that you've earned to fix problems is helpful. And then once you have established those technical skills, being very aware that you're going to get to the point where those technical skills might not allow you to progress, and it's those other skills, where not necessarily legal skills, like business skills,
soft skills, networking
skills, and again, not things that you would necessarily spend time doing. That will get you further. And I love to be sitting here and say that has been for me an overwhelming success, and I can't quite say that. I characterise it as a moderate success,
right? And
I can sort of see what I need to do to continue on that trajectory.
Yeah.
And you sort of, again, similar to your examples of being an entrepreneur, you make the mistakes, and you don't know what the mistakes are that you'll make, but you can sort of guarantee that of the 10 things you try, two of them might work, 3 of them might work, but just getting comfortable knowing that, failing again, but knowing that they're just sort of a path to eventually getting the right formula, hopefully. He says. So, I do think, and again, I mean, you do have to impair that for the quite privileged position I started off in, and that's not a formula for everyone, but I do think that, particularly for people coming through law firms and other professional services firms, that could be a pretty good pathway. It's not a unique pathway. I don't think a lot of people are doing. I don't think you need to be particularly smart to pull it off either.
Just dedicated and disciplined. Probably.
Yeah, and sort of know what your trajectory is and what you're going to need to do. And I do think it's pretty easily replicable by a whole lot of people who've
done it before.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
I really appreciate it, and I feel like we could sit here for another couple of hours chatting about stuff, but I've got to jump. But yeah, please come on again. I'd love to. Maybe we look at some topics we could talk through on a future episode. It could be quite interesting. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing your journey, or just a part of it. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, to be honest. But yeah, thank you so much.
No, it was a pleasure to have me anytime.